Sonic, the heart of your system.
Hello, BRIONY here from Kit Guru, and in this review I'm taking a look at the WOOTING 2 mechanical keyboard. This is the successor to the WOOTING 1, which was a 10 keyless keyboard, so this is obviously the full-size version. So if you're someone that really liked the look of the fancy technology on the WOOTING 1, you like the analog switches, but you felt like maybe it was missing something, then the WOOTING 2 does seem sort of like the perfect option. The WOOTING 2 does cost a little bit more for the extra functionality that you're going to get from the numpad, so it's €10 more, bringing in a total price of €150. So it's certainly not a cheap keyboard. It does definitely come in more at that high-end area of the gaming keyboard market, but I do think the overall build quality and aesthetics does sort of reflect that higher price tag. I really quite like the design. It's quite sleek, it's quite simple, it's quite a plain black kind of keyboard that should fit in with pretty much any setup. I think it does work quite well. It also has a little bit of extra customization as well with the sort of RGB lighting. The lighting on the WOOTING has quite a few different effects to choose between. You can change them all using the Wootility software, and I do quite like the lighting. Obviously, no gaming keyboard would be complete without RGB customizable lighting. The WOOTING as well, the lighting, it does come out at a decent brightness. It's probably not the brightest keyboard that I've seen, but it seems to look pretty good, especially in a dimly lit room. I also particularly like that the caps lock key does sort of light up when it's turned on, so you can tell when it's activated. The body of the keyboard is entirely black, and it does have a pretty high quality finish. There's no real problem areas. It also has some matching black keycaps as well. I really like the font on these. It is nice, clean, easy to read font. The keyboard doesn't have that strange gamery font that you can get on some gaming keyboards. Unfortunately though, the keycaps themselves are made of an ABS plastic, which does feel a little bit basic. The keycaps themselves also have quite a nice soft touch matte coating to them. I do quite like how it feels to type on, but unfortunately it does seem to attract quite a bit of dust and fingerprints. The stems on the FlareTech keyboard are the standard Cherry MX size, so if you wanted to use custom keycaps it would be pretty easy to do, and you can purchase PBT keycaps separately on the WOOTING website. I personally do prefer PBT keycaps because obviously they are longer lasting, and to me they do seem to provide a nicer, more satisfying typing experience as well. However, I do think for the price of this keyboard it would have been nice if WOOTING had included them instead of just using the more basic ABS keycaps. As you can see, the size of the WOOTING is pretty standard for a full-sized mechanical keyboard. However, I must say it's quite a bit smaller than you do find from some gaming keyboards. That's because it does actually lack a wrist rest. It doesn't come with a wrist rest, and it also lacks the sort of dedicated media keys you might often find at the top of the keyboard as well. So for me, this overall lack of features is definitely a slight disappointment. I do like to have a little bit of extra functionality, and I do quite like having a wrist rest as well. However, if you are someone that has a smaller desk space, you might sort of appreciate the WOOTING 2's more compact size. The chassis on the WOOTING 2 is mostly constructed of plastic, and it has what I'm pretty sure is an anodized aluminium faceplate. To me, I actually expected this keyboard to weigh a lot more than it does. When I first picked it up, I was like, oh, that's a really light keyboard. This unfortunately does make for a slightly hollow typing experience. However, the overall chassis does feel very stable and sturdy in general, and it stays very well planted on the desk. The keyboard does provide pretty much the same experience as well if you are someone that likes to raise the little feet on the back of the keyboard to adjust the height. It does stay very well planted on the desk thanks to the fact that it does have quite a few different rubber pads and things on the back of the keyboard. One thing I don't like about the rubber feet though is that they do flip out backwards as opposed to sideways. This is because they can sort of suddenly flick down in game if you do make a quick movement with the keyboard on your desk, and obviously that's not ideal. I quite like it when manufacturers opt to change the direction so they go out sideways and they're less likely to suddenly flick down. The braided cable that comes with the WOOTING 2 is a pretty decent length, so that gives you plenty of options when it comes to routing the cable through the various routing options on the back of the keyboard. You can have it coming out through the middle or from the left or right side, depending on your desk setup. I think it makes it slightly easier to keep everything neat. Also, the cable itself is actually removable. I do really like that because it means you can customize the cable. You can put a different colored cable in there if you wanted to, or obviously replace it if it happens to get damaged, and thankfully it connects using the far superior USB-C connector as well. The one thing I do miss on the WOOTING 2 though is it doesn't unfortunately have a USB pass-through port, and it's something that I found that I use quite often. I didn't realise quite how often I used it until I sort of started testing out the WOOTING 2. It might be something that you're not that bothered about, but it's something I sort of expect to have on a gaming keyboard that comes at a slightly higher price point. So now I'm going to finally move on to what makes the WOOTING 2 keyboard stand out a little bit from the gaming keyboard market, and that is the analog flare tech switches. So these analog switches are the same ones that you'll find on the WOOTING 1 keyboard, and if you watched my MK850 review, the Cooler Master keyboard that uses the aimpad technology, you'll be kind of aware how analog technology works, because the flare tech switches in the WOOTING do work in a similar way. They are basically pressure sensitive keys, so they use infrared lighting to detect how far down you're pressing the key, and then that can be translated into something a game understands. So for example, if you're playing a game that features a car, you can more accurately control the acceleration or the steering as if you're using an Xbox controller with the joysticks. So this obviously has a huge advantage for certain games. Because of the way the flare tech switches work, there are other advantages as well. Because of the analog technology that uses infrared light, they don't actually have to be soldered to the PCB, so you can actually remove the entire switch without having to get out a soldering iron or pry them off the board. They are very easy to replace. You take the sort of keycap puller and switch remover that comes with the keyboard, take the keycap off, and then you remove the switch from its little socket. Because I have the red version of this keyboard, it comes with 4 extra switches. I've got 2 extra blue ones and 2 extra black ones. The blue switches are the tactile and clicky switch, and then the black switches, the flare tech switches, are sort of a firmer version of the linear red switches, so they have a slightly harder actuation force when you press them. So the benefits of being able to remove the switches is that you can customize the keyboard. So if you wanted, you could have the WASD area with a linear switch, and then you can maybe have the rest of the keyboard feeling all tactile and clicky. You can obviously customize it in any way you want to, and it is very easy to do. Also, if you happen to have a problem with a switch, it's very easy to replace it if it gets damaged and you need to sort of replace the switch that's no longer working. Another benefit of having analog switches is that the actuation distance on the WOOTING can actually be changed using the software. So you can change the actuation distance from 1.5 to 3.6 millimeters. This basically changes when the key press registers. So with a traditional mechanical switch, the actuation distance that comes with the switch, you've only got the one option and it stays like that for the entire life of the switch. Whereas with this keyboard, because it uses infrared light, you can change when that infrared light sort of detects that the key press reaches that activation point, when it tells the computer that that key has been pressed. So you can set the actuation distance to 1.5 millimeters, so a really light key press will register, or you can change the actuation distance all the way to 3.6, or you can change it to somewhere around the middle of the keyboard. So for gaming, obviously a higher actuation distance is better because a really light key press is going to register really quickly, but if you're typing, you can set the actuation distance to be slightly lower, and therefore you're not going to accidentally press a key. So analog technology in switches and in gaming keyboards isn't quite as new and shiny as it was, and I have tried out a few other keyboards that do feature the analog technology. The thing for me that makes WOOTING stand out from the competitors is definitely the way they have used the technology to its maximum potential using the Wootility software. It's a great piece of software. It provides a load of different customization options and things, and I think it does make the most of the flare tech switches. Also, because WOOTING is kind of a essentially a Kickstarter company. It's definitely a smaller company. They always seem to be constantly updating the software with new features and things. They also listen to the community. They've got like their own Discord channel. They also have like a public roadmap as well, so you can see what features and updates are coming in the future. They seem a little bit more transparent and seem to put quite a lot more effort into their software than a lot of the larger companies do, which in a way is quite surprising, but it also means that their keyboard definitely stands out as well. So taking a look at the software, you can see on this first page it has customization for the RGB lighting effects on the keyboard. So it has the keyboard here itself, and you can click on the different keys and change the lighting effects. Left clicking sort of selects the key with the colour that you want. You can drag it, and then you can also right click a key and change the colour back to another colour on the keyboard. Change that back. You can adjust the colour the caps lock lights up and things, and there's loads of different effects to choose between. You can also adjust the brightness. You can also change the sort of settings here as well. On the second page, I'm currently on the digital profile. You've got the digital settings, so you can rebind what the profile keys do, and you can also turn on tachyon mode and adjust the actuation point. So the actuation point works on a slider, so you've got loads and loads of control, and then tachyon mode is a mode, when you turn it on, it basically changes the way that the keyboard works. It basically turns off all the sort of unnecessary features that might slow it down, and then it optimizes the keyboard for the fastest response time. So if you're a gamer, that's obviously going to be a good thing because your key presses are going to register that little bit faster. So going back to on the left hand side here, you've got the different analog profiles. So when you switch from digital profile, which is the profile that you use for typing with, to an analog profile, which is what uses the analog technology, you get even more options. So you're faced with the same page here where you can change the actuation distance and things. You've got the analog bindings section, so this is where you can bind the different keys on the keyboard to buttons that you might see on an Xbox controller, and from what I can see it does actually have all of the buttons on an Xbox controller. An issue I ran into on the MK850 from Cooler Master is you could only rebind certain buttons, whereas Wooting have given you the option to do the entire lot if you wanted to. You've also got the analog settings, so you can change the way that the analog curve works. So when you go to press the key, you can get kind of a different reaction from it. So they've got a few different presets to choose from: linear, aggro, slow, smooth, instant. I'm pretty sure you can customize these. Yes, you can simply drag them around if you want to as well. I'm going to go with the linear option. And then you've got the DKS settings, which is where obviously you can rebind those key presses so that your one key press can register as several different key presses. This is a slight bug I did come across with the software. It's not completely perfect, is that I've got a 4K monitor, and when I full screen it, it does actually kind of cut half of it off, so I do have to minimize it back down so I can see the entire settings. So what you can do, if I go onto my League of Legends profile, you can see all my DKS settings appear. And so what I've got registered is that, so the Q key, when you go to kind of press it down immediately, and you can kind of drag these around, you can add in different options as well. So you can see you can have 4 different settings. I did see this for the first time at CES in the software, and I did find it like pretty damn confusing, but the way they've integrated it into the software now is slightly easier to understand, and you've also got the options to kind of test it as well. So you can see that I just pressed the Q key there, and it does Q, and then it does shift. I broke it, but yeah, you can test it if you can test it. I'm not sure what happened. I'm like selecting the software, but for some reason it's going in and talking to Cortana instead. But yeah, the DK settings, you can obviously change what each key does if you want to. You can create even more profiles. There's lots of different profiles you can add, and you can bind them to the profile keys on the keyboard. You've then got the settings tab, so light theme, dark theme, very important. You can also see your serial number, you can see what version, you can update the firmware and everything, and then you can also disable the X input, which is like the Xbox controller input. So if you're having like a few issues with it, as the keyboard kind of coming up as an Xbox controller in game, you can kind of turn it off if you want to. But yeah, it seems in general to be a very, very good piece of software. Like I said, I have come across a few weird little buggy things, but I don't think it's something that's a huge problem, especially if you're not using a 4K monitor. But it's constantly updated, which I think is probably the main point. I've definitely seen a big improvement in the software from when I first reviewed the keyboard. First took a look at the WOOTING 1, and yeah, to me Wootility software is way better than a lot of the really janky, awful software that you often get with more mainstream peripherals. So I've talked and talked and talked, and what is the WOOTING 2 actually like to use? So I must say the typing experience does actually feel pretty different to the Cherry MX equivalent. So I have the Cherry MX red mechanical keyboard that I use, and this has the FlareTech red switches. And to me they do feel a lot lighter and more floaty to type on. I can think maybe the main reason for this is that you don't have the same sort of mechanical resistance or friction as you have with a Cherry MX switch. So the actuation force on this keyboard does actually feel lighter. To me, the FlareTech black switches actually feel more similar to the Cherry MX Reds than the FlareTech red switches do, even though they have the same specifications, if that makes sense. The actuation force just feel more light and floaty to type on. This isn't a bad experience though. I did actually quite enjoy typing on this keyboard. Like I said, it does feel slightly hollow because it is a slightly more lightweight keyboard, but in general I found it very easy to adjust to, and I think it does provide a pleasant typing experience. When it came to testing this keyboard during gaming, this is obviously where the analog technology really comes into its own and where it makes the most sense. So for me, getting used to the analog technology was definitely the hardest part. The keyboard itself seems to work as you would expect it to. It does take a little bit of setting up with certain games. You can't just jump straight in. Sometimes you have to rebind a few keys and things, but the analog technology does seem to work properly. It's more sort of reprogramming your brain to use the tech. So we're all used to doing that thing where we kind of tap to get the precise movement that we want, whereas with this keyboard you don't actually need to do that. You sort of have to retrain your muscle memory, which is actually really hard to do, and I did sort of struggle with it. It does definitely take quite a lot of practice, and I still certainly haven't managed to master it, if that makes sense. So for me it makes the most sense in games that feature cars. So if you're someone who likes to play GTA or Rocket League or PUBG, something where you're driving a vehicle, it obviously makes it much easier to control the acceleration and the steering. When it comes to playing FPS games on the WOOTING 2, I personally tried it out with CSGO. It does have some benefits, but it also feels a lot less natural as well. So with CSGO, it was quite easy to set up. You just have to rebind WASD to some other keys on the keyboard. I rebound it to the arrow keys, and then it seemed to work perfectly fine. You do get some extra walking speed, so you can actually move slightly faster with this keyboard and walk silently than you would if you were just holding the shift key. But it was so hard to remember to do that, and in the heat of the moment I found myself just holding shift like I normally would, and I forgot all about the technology on the WOOTING because you're just not thinking about it. You really have to retrain your muscles. And also I found that I was really scared to accidentally make noise, because if you accidentally push the key too hard, you're going to go into a sprint and the enemies are going to hear your footsteps, and if you play CSGO you know that's really bad. In the end I just didn't find myself really using it. The main benefit I found is that it's kind of cool to show off to your friends. You can be like, oh look at the different speeds I can do. But it really didn't give me that competitive advantage that I really desperately need in CSGO. Another feature of the WOOTING is the DKS. So like I mentioned, this is the technology that allows you to have several keys bound to the same single key, and you can have up to 4 actions on that same key. So down when it registers, and then up, and then when it comes back up to the top. I tried this out using League of Legends. So that's a game where you have basically skill shot mechanics, and I downloaded the profile from the WOOTING website that comes preset, and then you just have to go into the settings in game, rebind a couple of the keys. It's very quick and easy to do, and then it just seems to work straight away. And it does work really well. So if you half press down the key, the skill shot apparatus appears, whereas if you press it all the way down you get quick cast. So you can sort of have the best of both worlds there. You don't just have to have it set to quick cast, you can also have the option to take a more considered shot as well. I can imagine that's also going to work really well on other games that also use the same kind of mechanics. I guess like Dota, I've never played it, but I imagine it works in pretty much the same way. Heroes of the Storm, like those kind of games where you use skill shots, I can imagine that's a pretty cool feature. Another example that WOOTING actually uses with is Fortnite. So you can sort of, in the same key press, you can like open a menu, build, and then go back to your weapon like all on one key, which to me, Fortnite is a very fast-paced game, so that definitely does make sense, and I think it is probably going to give you a real advantage. So for me, the analog technology in certain ways when it comes to driving cars and things is a little bit hit or miss. You obviously have to retrain your muscle memory and things, but when it comes to the DKS, I think that's where the real competitive advantage lies, because you can do so much more than you can with a traditional keyboard. So overall, what do I think of the WOOTING 2? I must say there's no real denying that this is an expensive keyboard, but you do certainly get a lot of cool tech for your money. When you look at the price of other gaming keyboards available on the market, you can pay the same for a pretty standard mechanical keyboard. So therefore, I think the WOOTING comes in at a pretty good price considering all the extra stuff that you can do with it. Unfortunately, it is missing a few features I would like to see. For example, it has no wrist rest, it has no dedicated media keys, and it also has no USB pass-through either. But I do like on the WOOTING 2 that of course it now has a numpad, and I do like the dedicated profile keys as well. The design of the keyboard is sleek and attractive, and it has RGB as well, and despite the lightweight design it does actually feel pretty solid and very nice to type on and use. For me though, the main benefit of this keyboard that I think makes it stand out from other analog keyboards on the market is the really good utility software, and the fact that it is a smaller company means they're constantly updating and listening to the community and adding features and fixing bugs and things. You know that the software is only going to get better, and you're even going to get more and more features over the sort of life of the keyboard. Also, I must say that I have noticed a huge improvement as well from when I took the WOOTING 1 this time last year. The software has definitely come on a lot from that. So for me, I do think that is one of the main benefits, is that you get a lot of software and a lot of community support, it seems, as well. So for me, if you are a gamer and you really like the look of the analog technology, you want to get a little bit more extra functionality out of your keyboard, I don't really think you can go wrong with the WOOTING 2. It is obviously quite a bit of an investment, but for me, I think they've done analog technology really well, and I think it is kind of it's leading the way in the market when it comes to analog switches, I reckon, for me at least anyway. So if you like this video from KitGuru, make sure to give it a thumbs up. If you'd like to see more from KitGuru, make sure to hit the subscribe button. Remember to press that little bell icon as well, and you'll get a notification every time a new video goes live. I can't wait to see what WOOTING does next. I'm really looking forward to it. Also, make sure to check out our Patreon and also check out our merchandise as well. And we even have a Discord server you can join as well. WOOTING's got a Discord server, we've got our own Discord server, so make sure to check that out, and you can talk to us and things, and let us know a little bit about what you thought of this video.